Welcome to Love Beyond Time, a special collection of stories by Nicholas Leonard. Here, love stretches across moments and lifetimes. From a world saved by two hearts in love, to poems that speak across decades, to the quiet magic of first kisses and found families. And now, Apocalypse. The end of the world was the last thing on Mindy Marsh's mind, while James led her out onto the rocks at Nahant Beach in Lynn, Massachusetts. The couple looked like they listened to surfer rock. They seemed to have stepped out of the 1960s. They didn't dress like the Stoners. They didn't dress like the emos. Mindy's brown hair was styled in a kind of deflated beehive with a bun in the back. She wore a violet tank top with orange and pink flower petal patterns on it. James was a little tanner than Mindy. He wore jeans, a red shirt, and a light blue jacket.
"Come on, I got you,"
James assured her, although there was a dismissive note to him.
"I won't let you slip."
Something primal in them met the stinky smell of the sea with subconscious nostalgia. That's what may have made the pungence bearable. That salty smell, that fishy, sandy, stinky smell, was a former lover standing up to object at a wedding in a marriage of oversaturated perfumes. A mother in a hijab was shepherding her children off the rocks and back onto a walking path on the side of a busy street. The Boston skyline was far in the distance, the buildings, a kind of tears on paper blue. Mindy and James politely passed them. The little boy's black hair bounced while his mother moved monkishly behind him. He was in the victory of youth. She was in a pious way. And Mindy and James were in the current of love. So youth, family, and a faraway religion moved reluctantly off the rocks to let Mindy and James walk onto the rocks like newlyweds walking into a new house. "I picked the wrong day to wear sandals," Mindy shrieked with laughter. James held her. He guided her.
"That's all right. I got you."
There was still a masculine dismissiveness in his voice, yet he held her.
"Just step on the dry spots. Don't step on the dark rocks."
"And don't let go of you," Mindy interrupted him. They stopped on the surface of one great large rock. He returned her smile with one of his dismissiveness being welded into a majestic sword right in front of her.
"That's right,"
he said. They paused then, with his arm around her lower back like a poorly fastened parachute. The waves crashed ahead on the rest of the discoordinated rocks, and the couple inched a little further out onto the one great big rock.
"After dark, while you're reading, I'll sneak back down here and collect some mussels for dinner,"
James said, to which Mindy gave a defeated chuckle. "James, I'm pretty sure that's illegal."
"That's what you deserve,"
he insisted. He didn't tell her, but he saw a mussel in its black shell sleeping bag in one of the tide pools. With his arm still on her lower back, he put his other hand on her shoulder and said,
"Think of it. Spaghetti with tomato sauce and fresh mussels."
Mindy's smile spoke for her. He was a good cook and an even better thief. He was a petty thief, stealing flowers off of lawns for her. There was something about her that he liked when he lowered down a plate of food in front of her. Her eyes gleamed with gratitude, but it was more than that. "Are you going to pick up some poor random snails too?" Mindy asked. James paused and gave a teasing smirk.
You want to try that?
"No," she laughed. "I'm not serious."
Huh. Well, I'd try a snail.
"No, you wouldn't," Mindy laughed.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I would,
James said with a nod. He looked out at the ocean horizon as if that's where the Boston skyline was actually meant to be. No, the empty ocean horizon was much better for James and Mindy. He took her and strapped her to his chest. His arms became a harness around her belly, and the two stood before the applauding waves. They stood there and admired the ocean breeze misting on their faces. He admired the feeling of the weight of her belly beneath his interlocking wrists. How soft it was. How real she was. She admired the way he held her, his masculine dismissiveness wavering into clinginess. The day was too bright and sunny to welcome an asteroid. How dumb and lost it had spent its light-year life, tumbling through the wind chimes of space and time until the planet Earth happened to be in its trajectory. The misshapen boulder of a thing rolled. Jupiter was too far away to catch the asteroid, and Mars didn't have the voice to shout and warn the Earth. Gustav Holst was dead. Much like the popular music of the day, the asteroid had replaced what once was, and now was stream-rolling, creating bassy and meaningless drivel for the solar system to quiet in. Maybe some of the parts of the asteroid had a distant relation to the rocks of Nahant Beach. The one great rock that Mindy and James stood on had gotten white stripes and some kind of moss in its old age. But perhaps the asteroid and the beach's rock could have recognized each other last minute. Maybe when it was too late. The sky brightened. Blue turned to operating room white. Something muffled out the sun. Boston was right behind the beach, miles away. But that was nothing to an asteroid. What a beautiful city to deconstruct. What a perfect, inhabitable planet to ruin. What a species to annihilate. James and Mindy squinted, but the asteroid glowed. The ocean was just about to part beneath all the gravity that the asteroid was pushing down when the asteroid stopped. The asteroid saw James and Mindy, and the asteroid stopped. So far away to hear, it was just a barely audible poof. The asteroid disbanded with all that heat and kinetic energy waving out in an atomic orange light. Mindy gasped in awe. James reveled in his lover's awe. They watched the fiery light in the sky. It was as if a second sun had appeared and grew tentacles. The tentacles moved lazily like water, a fiery-colored peach juice. A temporal watercolor spilling. "James, what is that?" Mindy asked.
The sunset,
He said, even though he knew that wasn't it. "Oh, I think it's too early for the sunset, dear," she hushed. An orange glow came and went on their faces. The self-obliterating asteroid fell far away into the sea, its debris hidden behind the explosion of papaya light. The bending rays, which waved like tentacles, began to fade, becoming opaque. What once was the asteroid's path had left a tunnel in the atmosphere, and the tunnel glowed like a glowing peach. Every lint and fuzz on such a peach glowed. It made Minty smile. The sky became yellow. The spectral light disappeared and the sky was blue again. James, what was that?
I think it was for us.
The Poet's Widow. It might have been one of the strangest things to happen to Lynn, Peabody, and Salem, and nothing quite like it has happened since. It was a fleeting incident that was talked about in a "did you see that" kind of way, and not really talked about further. It was a singular occurrence that rippled through the Essex County civilization like a benign earthquake. Most people were too distracted to see it going by, and only caught the tail end of it as it scattered down the street. For the human race is never ready for these sudden moments, so sublime that they often border on horror. In April 2022, Lila Concord happened upon a book of Corbin Chatterton's poems in a moment of pure serendipity. Lila herself was 31 and played the organ at St. Mary's Church in Lynn, Massachusetts. She found the volume of Chatterton's poems in the South Branch of Peabody Library. On a particularly warm day, sitting dusty and neglected behind a row of 19th century novels that included Wuthering Heights, Emma, and Far from the Madding Crowd. Here, this bygone poet hid behind the statues of the English greats. An American child playing in their shadow. She reached for this volume the way you'd reach to scoop up an injured mourning dove. Something which had cooed outside her window that morning.
"Oh, I forgot we had that,"
the elderly librarian cooed, with her voice creaking with apology. Her eyes flew through her spectacles and onto the volume with both remembrance and inquiry.
"Corbin Chatterton. He was born in Salem, you know. Buried somewhere in Pine Grove Cemetery in Lynn."
It was kind of hidden behind the English classics back there, Lila explained. The library took on the brevity of a bazaar. The librarian walked into her own memory to shill out a bargain.
"Yes, he was an early romantic. He couldn't quite seem to launch himself into literary stardom like some of the others, though."
Lila felt the injured mourning dove twitch its wings within her chest. "Oh, what happened?"
"I think it was in 1825 that he got very sick and died. It might have been consumption. His poetry lived on through small presses. I believe this volume is an original from 1823.
"Can I check it out?"
"Honey, I don't think anybody's ever checked out this book. I myself even forgot it was there. I'll let you have it for as long as you want."
"Thank you. You said he was buried in Pine Grove Cemetery?"
"I believe so. Well, you see, originally he was buried in a potter's field somewhere out in Danvers, But when Pine Grove was established in 1849, his surviving brother motioned for him to be moved there. His brother worked and worked to afford a proper tombstone for him then. I don't remember where in Pine Grove he is exactly laid, but he is somewhere in there."
"Alone?" Lila breathed.
"Naturally,"
the librarian said, and took the book, opened it, and stamped the receipt stuck inside the first page. It had no prior stamps. "What did this young man write about?"
"I haven't flipped through that volume in a while. At first he was obsessed with the sea. Then I think he began going batty and started writing about love."
"One has to be batty to write about love?" Lila snickered to herself.
"Batty is Corbin Chatterton."
"Ma'am? How old was he?"
"I think early to mid-20s. He was an apprentice of some sort before poetry whisked him away. He had no higher education. He was just one of those late symptoms of Shakespeare."
Lila, having no response, turned the volume over in her hand, a movement that made her beaded bracelet jingle, and went. "I'll have a look at it today, thank you."
"You have a wonderful day, young lady, and enjoy this beautiful weather."
She gave a charitable smile while stepping backwards towards the door. "Oh, I know, you too. Bye." And she carried Corbin Chatterton back out into the world again, into spring weather that the poets of Romanticism would have gone hysterical for. She took the volume over to Pine Grove Cemetery, the grounds of which were enclosed by a tall cobblestone wall caked in moss. It was quieter than a library. All the tombstones, Madonna statues, and crosses ranged from the kind of stone Medusa's eyes introduced to the polished copper pennies would never be again. She carried the volume over to a dip in the land, where there was a turtle pond frequented by ducks. She sat down on the lime-green lawn, where its rainwater smell welcomed her, and all the turtles sunned themselves on the rocks in the pond. The turtles were such content aliens, with black heads that had yellow stripes, and eyes concentrated in an outer space serenity. Their content was contagious, and it put Lila in the proper mood to read poetry that was 199 years old. She read some verses aloud to herself as if to make sense of them. They made eternity for only two. We mustn't crowd the wedding thunderclouds. They made eternity for me and you. She flipped to the next page. She was careful with her voice, knowing literature and poetry needed a diligent vessel, and that even reading poetry alone was still a responsibility. So her voice was meticulous as she read a new poem to the turtles. Today I set a cooing pigeon free. Into the radiant tomorrow flew a dove to find my lover yet to be. I watched it near the sunset's golden hoop, and joined its lustre as the portal closed, to find a woman that I've yet to know. Lila read, and she imagined a young man in a white blouse with loose cuffs, donating a mourning dove to the sky in a celebratory manner. In her mind's eye, she saw the dove shrinking and shrinking as it flew away, until it vanished, and she thought about the mourning dove that had been cooing outside her window that morning. It ached her, because she could only imagine the majority of this pigeon-free battling the identity crisis of being a silhouette. Faint stripes of sunset light to break up the shadows on his figure. She could picture him releasing the bird, and she could picture him being 80% silhouette, even though the poem stated absolutely nothing about it. That was a short one, she said to the turtles. Then she started another poem. I hear the organ, but it's far away. I hear her rosaries jingling. Oh, what a gallows is a maiden's wrist, a future knuckle that I haven't kissed. The organ music jumps between our times. I hear the thunderclouds distort its hymns, which would have played the day, our wedding day. A sound no church in Salem claimed to make. I asked the organist to play again, and imitated what I heard to him. Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist. For what he played I didn't recognize. But still, sometimes the humming leaves my lips, and though alone in love I am today. The poem finished, and something came over. It does exist, she shouted at the open volume. That line, oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, caused this aggravation in her. She had shouted this with the air of being in the thralls of a romantic quarrel, a couple arguing in a kitchen. But she was just in front of the turtle pond in Pine Grove Cemetery. She had sounded so desperate to get some phantom husband to realize something. But all she did was make the sunning turtles retract their heads into their shells. The beads of her bracelet jingled when she turned the page. Beyond the universe's growing pains, the nebulas who take so long to stretch, I think my love is in the future days, and woo that just my ghost will know her breath. She mumbled, the poetry having administered some sedative to her narration voice. Corbin, she whined sympathetically under her breath. She brushed her fingers over the tan page, as if to disrupt the seeds out of the poetry. But all the words had already been planted and sprouted. She looked up from her volume and at the turtles. They were just now starting to poke their heads back out with the languid speed of sunrises. She felt as slow as them. She returned her attention to the poetry and read quietly, no longer reading aloud so as to keep her from shouting again. She ended up remaining quiet for so long that the turtles might have started believing that she was one of the Madonna statues of Pine Grove. If a Madonna statue got up, sat down, and took off her shawl. The volume was 121 pages. Some pages had 2 poems on them. Some had just 1 on it, and some poems rambled on for 2 or 3 pages. They weren't all about this strange long-distance relationship the poet had, but some were mundane and about nature, typical poet things. Some were about mortality, were celebrations of Jesus' sacrifice, but most of those 121 pages harbored poems of the strange long-distance romance. And when Lila had time to feel what she read, the analytical part of her mind started awake, which only deepened her curiosity.
"Oh, honey, I said you could keep that book for longer."
The librarian cheered when Lila entered the South Branch Peabody Library the next day. The librarian's face was red and puffy with joy, while Lila, everything about Lila was alive. The beads on her wrist jangled as she stomped, not walked, and her black tresses bounced. She had gotten a little pink from sitting in the sun yesterday, and now there were 121 pages of poetry in her eyes. She looked angry to have not known about the volume sooner. "Have you ever shouted at a book?" Lila asked, to which the librarian shrugged.
"Not in here. Not since I was a girl. But yes, plenty of times."
"When the narrator was wrong about something?"
"Honey, I find sometimes the narrator is often right. We just don't know how to accept it yet. That's how you know it's a great story. Why? Did Corbin Chatterton ruffle your feathers?"
Lila didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the volume and thought of the line that made her shout. "Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist." She didn't shout now, but felt her unbridled rebuttal echo within her. "I guess he moved me," she admitted. The librarian's smile was enough to make the April sky outside even bluer. "I just needed someone to talk to with about this collection," Lila said in another admission.
"Well, I'm certainly not busy now,"
the librarian said.
"Looks like it's just us in here, honey. Why don't we dissect some of it together?"
"I would like that," Lila said, and though separated by age, the two shared similar smiles. The librarian waddled out from behind her desk, and the two sat at a table with rustic rainbows of book spines shelved behind them. They went through the poems that affected Lila the most, but the whole time someone was knocking on the door of a cottage in her mind. She did her best to ignore it because she wanted to be polite and nod while the librarian read a poem, gave her 2 cents on it, and then read and analyzed another.
"I think this one summarizes Corbin's feeling of how the realization of existence is constant. See here. A string in time my fingers interrupt. I feel, not hear, the summer air I pluck. Geez, that's beautiful, isn't it?"
"It is," Lila agreed. But where did that pride in her voice come from?
"Play on the great nothing I wrote myself. Today's tranquility will be enough,"
the librarian read.
"The pointer finger plucks, the middle plucks, and then sometimes it twitches in my thumb. Ah, see? I love that."
The librarian held up her hand and wiggled her fingers, drawing a pleasant chuckle from Lila. "Is this the only work of his you have?"
I can call the main branch and see if they have any of his other collections, but yes, as far as I know, you are in possession of the only Corbin Chatterton work we have in the South Branch."
"Very interesting," Lila said thoughtfully, her eyes consulting the closed volume on the table. "Do you have any idea of where he's buried?"
"No, honey, I'm sorry to say I don't. As I've said before, he's in Pine Grove, but I'm not sure which section or lot he's in."
"I think I'm going to go looking for him." The librarian sounded sorry that she had to laugh.
"Honey, there's almost 100,000 people buried there. That place is over 80 acres.
And how many poets are buried there?" This made the librarian think. She spoke after a moment of consideration.
"I will say that you can veer from the military sections, as I do know he didn't serve. It most likely be an old tombstone. I'm not sure how legible the name and date will be, or if there will even be a name on it. Are you sure you want to do this, honey?"
"I feel like I have to, now, after reading him," Lila said. But then she snickered, and the snicker seemed to be hastily trying to fasten a mask over her face. She dipped her head and looked back down at the closed volume. "Where are you, Corbin?" Lila asked herself that afternoon while she was walking through Pine Grove. There was a pen and a red notebook in her hand, which she was planning to write a composition in, but she didn't want to start writing it until she found the poet's grave. Maybe creativity was equaled by death, and she wouldn't be able to find him. The only good thing was that it was a beautiful spring day, and the smell of the freshly cut cemetery lawns dispelled the grass's earthy breath. She applied sunblock on her shoulders, so that smell was there too, but the cold smell of the sunblock had gotten shy in the presence of the smell of the grass. She walked and looked. She passed down the rows of tombstones, walked the hills, and ignored the moppy-headed trees that tried tempting her with their shade. The sheer amount of tombstones quieted her, and the more she walked, the more she began to feel that this one cemetery seemed bigger than Massachusetts itself. It also distorted her sense of time after seeing the collection of dates, all embedded in stone, like 1,000 different Chinese fortunes. But they all ended up saying the same thing, which was, this person was born and then they died, and this person was born and then they died. The numerical possibility of her own species almost put her into a trance, which would have made her forget what she was looking for. But just like she had found the volume by chance, she found his grave. It was uphill, standing short with castle-like posture. Corbin Chatterton, 1801 to 1825, read the tombstone. The letters were only visible because they had been carved, and the wrinkles of the tombstone had not caught up with the Sinsel masonry yet. Atop the hill was a large oak with branches that sprawled out to form an umbrella over the daycare of tombstones. Corbin's tombstone was 80% shadows, broken by the 20% sunlight that managed to cut through the leaves. It was comforting to know that this tombstone had a ballet of sunlight and shadows to play on it all this time. Lila took a breath and sat down beside Corbin's tombstone, opened up her notebook and began to write, humming different notes and progressions to herself quietly so as not to disturb the dead. She wrote many movements and variations of the same movement, humming to herself and making corrections along the way, sometimes even starting all over again. What she was doing was composing more than a poem. Poetry is for the conscious. Music is for the subconscious, thus explaining the almost torpid state she entered into while inspiration whisked her away. Her pen, the whip that kept the steeds in flight. That's what Corbin would have said. She practiced on the keyboard in her room that night, making corrections and changes to her sonata along the way. Halfway through the composition, she decided on titling it as Corbin's Sonata. Its melodic and somber tones were hindered by the prissy range of the keyboard, but she knew it would sound all the better on the organ in St. Mary's. Still, even when she played it on the keyboard at 3 in the morning, she couldn't help but remember how she had imagined the silhouette of a man, stripped in sunset orange that almost revealed his identity, releasing a morning dove up into the sky. Corbin might have described the sonata as having come from sunset. It sounded like a triumphant but subtle, happy ending to life cut short. "Father Calabasas, do you mind if I try something out on the organ today?" she asked the next day while standing in the belly of St. Mary's. Father Calabasas was in his black cassock with the white necktie, his eyes piercing, his skin pale, and his voice of some Central European and slightly vampiric origin. Father Calabasas drew his pale Aurora Borealis eyes up to the indoor balcony of the church where the organ was. Its brass pipes and their many frowns was always quite the thing to see, and the machine always had monstrous promise to it. "Why, sure, I don't see why not, Miss Concord. Is it practice you seek?" said the priest with dunking coffee in his breath. She hesitated, almost dropping her red notebook. "I wanted to try writing something." Oh, well, I was about to go out and trim some of the bushes in the parking lot, but if you want someone to give it a listen..." "I'm good, Father," she said warmly. "I don't want to keep you." "I will most likely be able to hear it out there anyway," he said, and patted her shoulder before bumbling out of the church, ready to grass-stain his black pants. Lila turned behind the confessional booth and took a flight of stairs that was in a cramped chute where the church's anatomy was that of wood and not of brilliant marble and granite that are the colors of far-off temples. She proceeded to the organ like it was any other morning in Mass and sat down, opening up her notebook before her. There was more opportunity on an organ than on a piano or a keyboard, and the title she had written above the sonata seemed so promising aboard the steampunk-style instrument. Corbin's Sonata. That moment, when her hands hovered down towards the keys, was such a detrimental silence. It was like sitting in the theatre and truly not being able to determine the ending of the movie. For one reason or another, her fingers hovered there for a moment. She might have imagined the man, who was mostly silhouette, elating underneath an orange watercolor sky. Maybe sunsets were redder back then, when the tragedy of Salem was fresher in the sky. However, the sky was bright blue that day in Lynn. Her fingers pressed down on the corresponding keys, and immediately the pipes came to life. It was like a resurrection for the wrongly died. The swarm was a swarm that seemed to have started nowhere. It was in a hurry through Essex County. Tens of thousands of mourning doves, all in a violent commute, not just above the streets, but through them. A lady who had been walking her little dog ducked and laid on her stomach when the swarm passed. All their wings were so fast and small that it was amazing that wings as thin as playing cards could let such plump doves accelerate the way they did. Cars lurched to respective stops in that intersection that the witch house in Salem is. The swarm was such a brief reflection on their windshields. From here, the swarm ascended, but seemed indifferent to flying too high. No, this bird's business was not in the sky. The swarm slithered and winded through residential neighborhoods, some where nobody saw them, and some where people did. They curved up and over buildings when they had to, but always came curving back down, slinking in roller coaster finesse to wherever they were going. The librarian in the South Branch Peabody Library was too involved in the book she was reading to see the blurred traffic past the window. But its sound alerted her, and she looked up from her book when it was too late, with a couple of patrons doing the same. Horns honked. A child reached out of their stroller and giggled with the two budding teeth it had. Dogs yipped, not out of malice, but out of an absurd understanding with nature. The falcons that hid in trees stayed themselves from chasing the swarm. Seagulls in the many pothole-infested parking lots remained grounded. Father Calabasas was intrigued with the sound that was coming from his church, while he stooped over to weed a strip of mulch from which some hedges grew. It enhanced his gardening duties. The music sounded as misunderstood as Toccata and Fugue, triumphant as 99 red balloons, and as tickling as Vivaldi. And Lila's fingers tickled on the keys as if she had been playing it all this time. Perhaps the song was always in her. That's why she played it so well. She just had to write it down for it to exist. Exist. It did exist. Her pleading shout at the turtle pond had been worthwhile. The more the sound came out of the church with the attitude of a newly wedded couple, and the more Father Calabasas progressed down the row of hedges, the more he wished that the piece was something that he could play in his car. He wished he had it to listen to on his way to Dunks, on his way to church, on his way to the houses of the elderly when supplying communion. Something cut the air. A shadow entered down the street that St. Mary's was on, and Father Calabasas turned to see the swarm of mourning doves shooting towards the church. Being not afraid, he stood still and watched the swarm fill the space between houses, the sound of all their wings unfolding and folding the air. The swarm was as long as an unwinded fingerprint, and it took a while for the entire swarm to amalgamate around St. Mary's. It created an ever-turning vortex around it, flying, flying, flying in a circle. When the swarm was finished arriving, Father Calabasas stepped back and craned his neck, watching the tornado of mourning doves churn. They all flew so fast, but so elegantly, without crashing into one another, that it seemed they had the grace of fighter jets. Oh, but this was a peaceful thing. The priest watched with his jaw dropped until Corbin's sonata ended in the sorrowful chuckle of some apologetic but happy notes, and the swarm started uncoiling itself from the church. This took some time as well, given the length of the swarm, but eventually the church was rid of it, and the swarm ascended until it became faint as smoke, growing smaller and smaller, until Father Calabasas saw nothing but a blue April sky. But how strange it was to see one mourning dove falling out of the air, its wings working rapidly to cool its re-entry. It landed on a telephone wire and looked down at the priest. It looked at him and cooed like a curious cat.
"Oh, your wings must be tired, little friend,"
the priest said, despite the distance between him and the telephone wire. And like that, it ended. Lila's fingers retreating from the keys. The only sound in the church was the faint jingle of the beads on her wrist. Had she seen the swarm outside the stained glass windows? I'm not sure. We have to leave her now, but I think she sensed us. Part of her must have heard our wings berate the air and send feathery winds against the church. I saw a swarm of mourning doves crusade, in unison into the candle clouds. Their little wings have such a sky to break, their little wings against their bellies pound.
Love yard. When I looked down at my grandparents' headstone in the love yard, while a breeze tickled the branches of the dogwood trees, I didn't see dates of birth or death. No, I saw one singular date shared beneath their names. July 4th, 1966. Have you been inside the cemetery where every tree has pink leaves? The love yard mostly had dogwood trees, but it also had the occasional towering pine tree, but the verdant green of these pine trees were so dark that they didn't affect the pink bushels up and down the acres of the love yard. They pointed up like black steeples, churches for grey squirrels and baby owls. Why was it odd that I found a headstone with my grandparents' names on it? Because they were still very much alive. What was even odder was that I knew that 1966 was the year they got married after a whirlwind romance that spanned mere weeks. The headstone next to theirs was in a similar style. 2 names, 1 date. No birth dates, no death dates. One singular date, as though it triumphed over both birth and death. This neighboring headstone had October 31st, 1997 for its singular date. Did this neighboring couple get in a car crash coming home from a Halloween party? That's where my mind went to first, but that wouldn't make sense, seeing as my grandparents were still kicking and in good health for their age. I had gotten fired from working the grounds of Pine Grove Cemetery in Lynn, Massachusetts, because I kept falling asleep by the turtle pond. So I thought it was good to apply to this other cemetery in a region I will not disclose. This place has become so precious to me since I must maintain its secret. In fact, I am pretty sure the job posting for a groundskeeper at the Love Yard was a mistake. My second reason for applying was how I found the name cute, it being a play on the word graveyard. I've since come to realize why I ever even got the job in the first place. How slowly I walked towards a singular conclusion, passing down aisles of headstones as though I walked down a tightrope. Every stone had two names and one singular date. Singular. How modest yet triumphant every month appeared in Cinzel font, and then those numbers which seemed to have conquered Roman numerals, and then the years like coordinates in space. It seemed as though something beyond us came to appreciate how we combine letters and numbers to pin a certain place in time. And whatever place and time that was masoned into every headstone had to be an incredibly important place in time. A place in time, the paramount of two people. What was this? I walked on, reading the names like characters in novels I'd never read. What was odd was how intact every headstone seemed to be. One headstone had an 1848 date on it, and it was just as grey and shiny as all of the others. I wondered if they had been so well unkempt by he who I succeeded, or if its headstone was composed of some indestructible, undirting stone. Were these the toenails of Roman concrete that I passed? I think I only walked for so long because I was looking for a tombstone instead of a headstone. One stone that was a proper cemetery tombstone, but I found none. All of them were in identical fashion. Two names, one date, one singular date. I had been tending to the Love Yard grounds for about a month when I noticed something incredibly odd. There was a lack of funerals. In fact, there had not been one funeral since I started walking there. The dogwood trees did not change their leaves. Pink was such a stagnant color in the Love Yard. My vision became overly familiar with the pink of the dogwood trees and the dark greys and light greys of the headstones. There were no mausoleums, so the only indoor areas I had were the tool shed and restroom. I thought those who passed Love Yard's gates were mourners, but that theory simply didn't match with how every headstone had a singular date. So it was out of curiosity that I followed one couple through the sea of headstones one morning in early May. Hand in hand, they walked as though freshly out of church, halos melted all over their bodies. She was a redhead, with her orange hair being like a lost cousin of the pink of the dogwood trees, and he seemed of Greek or Italian descent, with tan skin and black hair. She was in a dress too elegant to be a dress, but a dress that would have been great as a curtain in a drawing-room window. It was a crimson dress with olive gold flowers patterned on it. He wore a light blue-collared shirt and khakis. They didn't see me slip out of the tool shed. They didn't see me stalk them, occasionally seeking shelter behind a dogwood tree. In lackadaisical descent, some petals fluttered down, only for a jealous breeze to take them away from the couple. They were either unaware of the wind that stole their petals, or they just didn't mind. The loveyard had so many dogwood petals to offer. I trailed them up until they stopped before a headstone with a dogwood tree nearby, its pink petals so light it barely created shade. Before this stone, their heads were tilting in amusement. I emerged. "Is that stone all right?" I called. They turned around with the boy answering jovially. "All right. It's got the correct date." I slowed my approach, muttering to myself. "Correct date?" He had his arm around the girl now, which she looked pleased to have over her shoulder like a fur. They had a look in their eyes that seemed as though they had seen the universe together. "And what date would that be?" I asked. "May 3rd, 2024, answered the girl. "That's a year ago today," I said. I heard the dumbness in my voice, though I was not that embarrassed. For some reason their presence assuaged me. "And what happened on May 3rd, 2024? They stopped and looked at each other, a snicker on their teeth. They looked back at me, pausing, and I was uncertain who would answer me. It was she who answered with a voice that she would have used to describe one of the nebulas that they saw when they saw the universe together. That was the day he kissed me for the very first time. The day we had our first kiss. How could two sentences come down into my heart like one singular raindrop? I can't imagine the face that I made standing there. Whatever expression I was making didn't bother the couple. I think they treated me as they would have treated a minister who'd one day wed them. "I'll leave you two to your celebrations," I said with a bow, while beginning to walk backwards. They nodded at me before returning to admire their names and that singular date on their headstone. I darted my eyes to the other stones throughout retreating. What countenance the dogwoods took on in that moment! Their colors seemed able to glow, as if pink lightsabers existed, and a sudden safety came over the loveyard, as though the atmosphere took a massive and satisfying deep breath. I returned to my tool shed and realized how unbelonging it was among the headstones and dogwood trees. It seems to have been plopped down there like Dorothy's house. I went inside, rummaged about my desk in search of the map on which I circled the plot my grandparents' headstone was in, found it, re-examined it, and bolted out of the tool shed. Throughout my run, some dogwood petals pirouetted down onto me like something a flower girl would throw. I was running like a best man who was late for the wedding. In fact, I was 59 years late. My grandparents had had their first kiss 59 years ago in 1966. I leapt down aisle after aisle of headstones, past every memorial of true love, almost tripping on my own velocity and excitement. Part of me wishes that that race through the loveyard could have lasted forever. How triumphant the pink of the dogwood trees were when I rediscovered my grandparents' headstone. I was catching my breath, my smile such a poorly guarded net. No cemetery could compare.
For here was the testimony of true love. Here was the evidence. I was the evidence. I was the evidence looking down into the other evidence. The lineage in which their love lives on, looking down at that singular date, July 4th, 1966. To keep myself from hysterics, I turned around and started reading the other headstones. But this did not keep me from hysterics, for I knew that the Reaper did not know this cemetery existed. The more far away the date, the more alive I felt the muscles in my face become. The more far away the love story, the more in awe I felt, the more victorious and happy I felt on behalf of humankind. What a beautiful place! Pink dogwood trees, dove-grey headstones, singular dates. The next day, May 4th, 2025, was a Sunday morning, and I spent it with dogwood petals overpopulating my brain while I had tea with my grandparents, cauterizing the tranquility of a smile with a sip of very hot tea.
Rain on Soulmate Street.
My name is Ian Solitaire, and I first saw Mr. and Mrs. Rain the day after I moved into a contemporary bungalow on Soulmate Street in Linfield, Massachusetts in March 2022. Well, the day after my dog, Old Lady Sadie, a 12-year-old black lab boxer mix, and I moved onto Soulmate Street, that is. The male equivalent to an old lady with too many cats might be a young man with one dog. That's an unbalanced and unfair comparison, I know, but it's how I felt the moment Soulmate Street took me in. It magnified the loneliness that Sadie and I shared. Soulmate Street was tucked into the suburbs of Linfield, situated 6 minutes away from a shopping plaza by car. It was one of those neighborhoods that the American dream was hiding in, while failing infrastructure and inflation was still hunting it down in the cities. On this day after, Sadie was on the couch in my living room on Soulmate Street and shaking because there was a clap of thunder. The thunder had come and gone, but it remained in Sadie. I was standing at the window with my hands in the pockets of my khaki pants, the only suitable dance for smooth hands like mine, also hiding from failing infrastructure and inflation. It was bad enough there was a whole new place for her to be scared of, but now there loomed a thunderstorm. She had a phobia of hardwood floors because she didn't like how her paws skidded, click-clacked and skated on them, and our bungalow on Soulmate Street was strictly hardwood floor.
"It's okay, Sadie,"
I said, averting my eyes up to the sky that was infected with oyster shell clouds.
"This time of year, April showers bring me flowers."
The clouds were there, but they hadn't surrendered the earth their raindrops yet. They crept so nervously onto the stage, but the opera of a storm was near. I turned around chuckling.
"Pardon me, I forgot it's March."
She looked at me with scared brown eyes, confused about why the sky had scolded her. She smacked her lips and looked at me as if to ask me to make the sky bright again. It was indeed unnatural how grey and blue it was becoming on a Wednesday afternoon at only 1 o'clock, but I, unlike Old Lady Sadie, had an affinity for thunderstorms. Little did I know I wasn't the only one on Soulmate Street who had an affinity for thunderstorms. So much so that I'd second-guess my own. I turned around to face the window once again,
and I had known Sadie long enough to know that she was performing one of her quirks she did whenever she got nervous, which was her circling her snout in the air as if to cast some kind of apology. It got so dark that I actually had to turn on the living room light. A burst of thunder came as if to tell me to turn my light off, but I disobeyed, and that made Sadie nervous. I heard the tag on her collar jingle as she did her signature head swirl again. I hoped the excitement in my voice would settle her.
"Ah, here it comes, Sadie,"
I exclaimed as rain started pelting Soulmate Street. Oh, how the Lapis atmosphere collapsed. Another clap of thunder cracked apart, and rain began to strum along the street with every drop as delicate as glass. I'm not ashamed to say I giggled to myself. I was smiling triumphantly. The falling rain came in such an unbridled musical manner that it did have the characteristic of a guitar being constantly strummed, and Sadie's little tail beat against the couch like a drum. The wet sky was not classically trained, and it strummed angrily, forcing its music down on every gable and rooftop on Soulmate Street. And I watched Soulmate Street become the whole of an uninhabitable planet. My trance was broken when one of the houses across from my bungalow, a 2-story white house, opened up its door. A couple, my neighbors whom I hadn't met yet, skipped out of this house, across their perfectly verdant lawn and into the street, where the rain was the most violent. The man was skinny and taller than the woman. He had sandy, somewhat spiky hair and small eyes, and was in a plain black t-shirt and jeans. The woman was also in jeans but wore a sweater with horizontal red and black stripes. Her hair was a shade darker than his and bobbed. It seemed they had come out because it rained. I watched her open up her arms and spin, and seeing this, her partner did the same. They weren't the same as when they fled their house. His hair was getting patted down and gelled. The woman's hair a disassembled crown. It seemed the rain unlocked and greased their souls. I wish I heard the thunder of their mouths, the giggles thunder tries to replicate. How fleeting are our favorite storms. It waned. The prison riot in the sky relaxed via reluctant oyster-colored clouds. I blinked as if my lashes would make the storm come back, but some slower clouds were squeezing out their final drops. Sadie was silent behind me, maybe soothed by my deep concentration at the window. I watched the woman tilt her head backwards and catch the final droplets on her tongue. And yes, her partner did the same. The woman stepped away and clapped her hands. They smiled at each other like they had just gotten off some roller coaster that had loops and twists similar to our helix ribbons. In fact, they spun like strands of DNA. With their clothes sticking to their bodies and how wet they were, I could discern the undulations of their chests, the busy gallops of excited lungs, their faces, freshly scrubbed and polished busts. But the rain was over. All that was left was a residual gloominess in the atmosphere, so the couple went back into the White House from which they left. I remained at the window, in either confusion or wonder. Which one, I'm not sure. I turned around and saw Sadie, who had exhausted herself with all that worry. I went over to her to comfort her while I tried making sense of what I had just seen.
The next day was a sunny day, and I made sure that their cars were in their driveway when I crossed the street with a shopping bag. Sadie was at the window in my bungalow, watching me cross. She let out a forlorn howl that was quelled when I turned around and waved at her. She departed from the window and was most likely pacing the bungalow and filling it with wines. I rang the doorbell of the White House and waited not half a minute before the door was opened by the woman who had celebrated in the street the other day. Her eyes were beaming, her teeth made to smile, and her hair was dry. She was shorter up close, maybe 5'2", and she was in black pants and a maroon sweater. "Hello," she sounded pleased. "You must be the new neighbor from across the street."
28 Soulmate Street. That's me.
She turned and called into the house. "Honey, our new neighbor's here." I didn't wait for the man. I lifted up my shopping bag and started speaking with the air of polite excuses.
I didn't mean to spy the other day, but I just really like thunderstorms, so I was at the window when it started to rain, and I noticed you two came jumping out.
The man appeared beside the woman, and the couple listened to me from the doorway with the anatomy of a happy home behind them.
I went to Market Street today, that plaza nearby, and I figured I'd get you two some raincoats.
I handed the shopping bag to them. The woman took it, looked inside, and then up at the man. They looked back at me with faces caught between surprise and gratitude. The woman pulled out a pair of yellow rubber boots.
"Just a gift,"
I suggested. "Oh my goodness!" the woman gasped. "Usually it's the other way around." "What can we get you, son?" the man asked quickly, as if he was in debt and he was eager to pay it. I got shy.
"Oh, no, that's not necessary."
"But we should," the woman said as her man reached into the shopping bag and took out a yellow raincoat. She continued speaking. "What kind of cookies do you like?"
"Oh, chocolate chip, ma'am."
She gave her man a grin. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to him. "I am a ma'am." "I must be a sir, then," the man said before jetting out his hand. "We're the Rain couple." I shook his hand, smiling at my discovery.
"The Rain couple,"
I murmured.
"I am Ian Solitaire, and you may have heard my dog Sadie howling before I came over."
I know no other way to explain this, but he had the grip of old America. It would only be fitting later on when I found out that he coached for Little League in Linfield. He was striking, dashing, charming, but gruff like a pitcher. "Oh, please!" Mr. Rain exclaimed as if remembering something. "Come on in, son." "Do you like tea or coffee?" Mrs. Rain queried. I mulled it over on the way from the living room to the kitchen, only to say,
"Whatever you're having."
"Tea it is!" Mr. Rain exclaimed with the excitement of a home run in his voice. "Mrs. Rain has an affinity for tea, on account of my Irish grandma," she said. They sat me down at a granite island as they worked in synchronicity with getting out mugs, tea bags, and putting on the kettle. And instead of smelling like food or candles, I noticed the smell of an approaching rainstorm, which was impossible because of how sunny it was. While waiting for the kettle, Mr. Rain and I exchanged the typical "what do you do for work?" while Mrs. Rain tried on one of the yellow raincoats. At first my heart sank because it looked too big for her. But beneath the big yellow hood, she smiled and seemed to like how her hands didn't come out of the sleeves. I got distracted by her and wasn't paying attention to what Mr. Rain was saying. I nodded, though, to give the appearance of intent. The kettle whistled, and before we knew it, our 3 mugs fanned the same steam. Mr. Rain chuckled at his wife for having already put on the raincoat. I too felt the chuckle in me coming up like the steam from our mugs, because it was entertaining to see someone in a raincoat on such a sunny day. Mrs. Rain kept the yellow raincoat on the whole time I stayed for tea. The 3 of us sat on stools on the granite island while sunlight filled the kitchen. I don't remember what exactly were the topics of our conversations that day, but what I do remember is how accepted I felt. These people felt like a lost aunt and uncle. Better yet, characters from a movie. I do remember more clearly what we talked about when my tea was almost gone. The tea diminished, but the sun did not.
So,
I said.
what was that yesterday?
A thunderstorm? Mrs. Rain answered, unprejudiced.
No, I mean, you two coming out to run around in the rain. Wasn't it cold?
I queried.
And out into the middle of the street, no less. A car could have come.
A silence was swept between Mr. and Mrs. Rain before Mrs. Rain answered. We love the rain. My head swam and a nod and a chuckle started in my voice.
That's a little obvious, but why did you have to go outside in it and get all cold and wet? I watched the storm from my window.
We like that part, the getting cold and wet part, Mr. Rain answered. We like getting our hair wet.
Even your clothes?
I queried.
Do you dry off, change when you get back inside?
A wonderfulness came into Mrs. Rain's eyes when she answered me, No.
But your floors look spectacular, I protested. So did your couch, and nothing seems waterlogged or ruined.
I think the storm will only ruin you if you let it, Mrs. Rain suggested.
I can't do this with Sadie,
I thought aloud.
She's afraid of the rain.
This made Mrs. Rain giggle.
And you guys aren't afraid of lightning?
I asked after noticing the gold rings on their ring fingers. Oh, that's a myth, Mr. Rain said after noticing I had looked at his and his wife's wedding rings. He put up his hand to relay this, slightly wiggling his fingers.
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Rain,
I said, standing up.
I appreciate your hospitality and you being the first people I meet on Soulmate Street.
Mrs. Rain gasped and pointed at me. Chocolate chip cookies, she said, remembering. The raincoat hood slid down and covered the upper half of her face, but she brought up her other hand to fix it quickly. Mr. Rain shook my hand again with great sportsmanship, and they saw me to the door. What a long walk home it was from their house to my bungalow across the street. I think it only felt that way because their kitchen felt more like a home than the empty rooms of my bungalow, which didn't smell like muggy summer rain like theirs. April came, and April showers brought me flowers. I just so happened to be home while it rained one afternoon. This time I wasn't as excited for the storm as I was excited to watch Mr. and Mrs. Rain, for I knew surely they would come out. I ran up to my window at the first stroke of thunder, one which sounded like a tyrannosaurus roaring in the sky. Sure enough, the door of the Rain residence opened up and Mr. and Mrs. Rain came prancing out, but not in the rain boots and raincoats I had gotten them. My eyes went into a squint. Why weren't they wearing their raincoats? Their clothes looked so nice and comfortable, and now they were getting ruined in the rain. Sadie's tail thumped against the couch as the Tyrannosaurus beyond the oyster shell storm clouds roared again. But I couldn't pay Sadie any mind because I was watching Mr. and Mrs. Rain jump into the fastly forming puddles, trying to make splashes as big as they could. I wasn't offended or disappointed that they hadn't put on the raincoats I bought for them, but maybe I was a little confused. More than anything, I felt lost. I watched their hair darken and become matted down to their skulls. Even behind the curtains of inclement rain, I could discern the flicker of their lashes, the smiles that they communicated with like sonar used by dolphins that humans would never understand. Indeed, they moved with bliss that dolphins have. Their spirits sought the sea but got the rain, and rain was all the storm clouds ever had. And that was all they ever needed. They didn't want or need my raincoats. I took a deep breath and watched Mr. and Mrs. Rain celebrate the rain. Mrs. Rain threw her head back and caught some droplets on her tongue, and Mr. Rain did the same. Then he took her by the waist. They spun like clumsy ice skaters, and then he kissed her. The thunder echoed like it heard my heart, and heard how hollow that it had become. I felt like a fossil instead of a human while watching them. The next time it rained, they came out again, but this time, so did I. I did it just to see what all the fuss was about. They didn't notice me at first, so I stood on my front lawn with my hands in my pockets while their laughter shattered the violent sprinkling of rain. I looked up into the sky, the rain constructing a hyperspace tunnel above my face. The thunder scolded me, telling me to get back into my house. "Ian!" Mrs. Rain shouted over the rain. The couple came to a clumsy stop, almost losing their balance.
Hello,
I said in a monotone fashion, not really enjoying being drenched by the rain. "How are you doing, Ian?" Mr. Rain queried. I waved, finding it hard to speak with all that rain beating my eyes and mouth.
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
The thunder answered on behalf of them. It was sunny the next day, and I found a plate of saran-wrapped chocolate chip cookies in front of my door when I got home from work. My lawn was fresh from the previous storms, but I had no garden decorations, no flamingos, stone turtles, or gnomes, so the plate of chocolate chip cookies had the brevity of a soul-surviving garden decoration. My lawn's first evidence of life. They didn't have to leave a note at all. I took the plate and went inside, where Sadie greeted me. Her eyes relayed that she had spent the day surviving her own inward apocalypse. I patted her head and put the cookies on the kitchen table. When I opened up the saran wrap, all that came was the final breath of a bakery, not something great and warm. The cookies had spent all day suffocating under the saran wrap while I was at work. Whatever fragrance they had before was gone. Still, I inhaled what was left. It was nothing compared to the rainy weather smell of Mr. and Mrs. Rain's house. That smell had stuck with me. They say the most distinctive smell to a human is the smell of a coming storm. And that was the smell of their house. I was new to adult and suburban conversations, so I wasn't sure if it was rude of me to ask what I did. It was their answer that made me feel this way.
Will you two ever have any children?
I asked on one of those sunny April days when I was over there for tea. At the Granite Island they went silent. "We've tried," Mr. Rain explained, putting his hand on Mrs. Rain's back. I could hear his skin make friction and rotations on her back as he talked very carefully. "The doctor said we can't." "It's just not possible for us," Mrs. Rain said.
I'm sorry,
I said quickly and meekly. Don't be, she said with the faintest smile. Mr. Rain spoke with a kind of deflated humor in his voice. We moved into Linfield 10 years ago because we liked the school system. He didn't have to elaborate for my heart to break just a little more for them.
What about adoption?
I asked with some preemptive regret. Mrs. Rain shrugged. It's noble. I'm afraid we just aren't good enough people for that. It wouldn't be the same.
Well,
I mumbled, and mumbling because of the way sympathy was poisoning me.
I'm very sorry.
The couple lit up a little with apologetic smiles. Don't be, Mr. Rain said. We've made our peace with it. It was difficult, Mrs. Rain admitted with memories of a foreign war in her voice. She looked at her husband and said, But we got through it together. Life's a network of symbiotic relationships. And I think I was becoming interwoven with Mr. and Mrs. Rain. I admired their resilience, their attitude, the smell of their house, and the way they found celebration in the rain. Thankfully, Sadie fell off of my comfort, and the bungalow was becoming hers more than mine, for she slept where she went and spent the days however she wanted. I spent my time away from work in perplexion. Part of growing up is realizing humans are strange even when they're older than you. Even in the most mundane and idyllic of suburbs, you can find the beautiful missteps of the human spirit. An injured sense of wanting is a very human thing, and it can be found in the desert, in desolated slums, and in idyllic suburbs. Mr. and Mrs. Rain started involving me more in their lives. In May, I started attending the Little League games that Mr. Rain coached. Mrs. Rain and I sat in the bleachers and watched. Children had never seemed smaller to me until those days when I saw them in oversized hitter helmets and striped uniforms, sliding and wobbling to base. They invited me over to dinner, of which I was thankful. One thing that stuck out to me was how they didn't offer me wine until a little too late into the night, as if they had forgotten I was an adult too. I owned my own house and could legally drink, of course, but this seemed to escape them. On one occasion, Mrs. Rain commented about my 5 o'clock shadow, saying some remark about how it surprised her. And Mrs. Rain seemed like she was going to have a heart attack when I had a romantic interest over for dinner. I think she was watching me escort the woman to her car when the night was ending because she asked me, Ian, who was that? The next day.
Someone who won't be dancing in the rain with me,
I said.
She ghosted me.
Ghosted you? What's that? I explained, and Mrs. Rain hugged me and pouted as if she just learned something terrible. I was learning that if you spend enough time with a couple, they start to adopt you, and part of me was tempted by the whimsical enamorment of it. But I knew it was wrong. They were playing house in a house they already had. I had a decision to make. Let this good couple continue their delusion, or confront them as sympathetically as I could. And though I was scared, I chose the latter one night at dinner at their house. It still smelled like a thunderstorm, even though Mrs. Rain had cooked something with spinach and mushrooms, a dish which would have filled the kitchen on any other occasion.
Mr. and Mrs. Rain,
I croaked, putting down my fork.
I have to address something.
Mrs. Rain froze while she was taking a pot off of the table and taking it to the sink. Mr. Rain looked up from his plate with the readiness of a father waiting to hear his son had enlisted in the army.
We've been spending a lot of time together.
I winced, trying to get the struggle out of my voice.
and I'm very thankful for how you two have been treating me. But I can't help but wonder if it's because you too see me as a child."
Their keen paralysis intensified.
"Have you two been pretending that I am the son you never had?"
I finally asked. I thought Mrs. Rain was going to drop the pot. I expected Mr. Rain to shout at me, but he looked too suddenly sad. Regret swelled up inside me as I watched her eyes darken and her face scrunch into a pout. Despite this, she tried maintaining the attitude she usually put up. All she could do for a while was shake her head. Mr. Rain kept staring at me the whole time, probably deciding whether to be angry or sad. "I thought it from the moment you got us those raincoats. You looked just like I'd thought he'd be," Mrs. Rain squeaked. "A cherub, all grown up."
"Whoever raised you did a fine job, son,"
said Mr. Rain with his sense of good sportsmanship. I hurried to speak.
I don't mean to offend."
"No." Mrs. Rain shook her head, put the pot down and wiped her eyes. "We're sorry. We shouldn't have latched onto you like this."
"Latched onto me?"
I wondered aloud. Then something clicked in my brain.
"If you guys can adopt me, then you can surely adopt a baby for real. I'm too old to be your son. I'll help you guys through the adoption process."
"You'd help us?" Mrs. Rain chirped like an injured bird. I recoiled in surprise.
"Of course I would."
Mr. Rain stood up with a Viking vigor to him, and at first I thought he was going to flip the table at me, but he didn't. He was on the verge of tears as well.
"You're a fine man, son,"
he said fervently. It has been 2 years since that night in the kitchen of Mr. and Mrs. Rain's. It's October 2024 now, and Sadie is still kicking despite all odds. I was going to rake leaves the other day, but it started to rain. It was only out of instinct that I looked out the window, but it was out of admiration that I smiled. Mrs. Rain was walking a toddler in a little yellow raincoat down the sidewalk. She was also in a raincoat, the one I had gotten her, but the hood was down, giving her hair the appearance of melting. How unbalanced the toddler walked, and how patient Mrs. Rain was. There came a clap of thunder, and I heard the distinctive cry of a child. Mrs. Rain swiftly picked the toddler up and carried them into the White House across the street. I turned to see Sadie on the couch. I had a whole lot to think about, and she had nothing to say. Not many dogs do. I felt something similar to what the tea had made me feel 2 years ago. I sat down with Sadie and we listened to the storm together.
God couldn't give them children. God gave them the rain, just not as much as he had given Noah. The stork was lost inside their favorite storms.